If she was never his true mate, why did it feel like his soul was breaking? The question would haunt Alpha King Ethan Blackwood for years, but on that cold autumn morning, standing before the entire kingdom, he believed he was doing the right thing. Silver banners fluttered above the Royal Moon Plaza, their embroidered wolves shining beneath the pale sunlight. Thousands of citizens filled the stone terraces surrounding the ceremonial grounds. Noble families occupied the front rows. Warriors lined the outer walls. Merchants, healers, elders, and travelers crowded every available space. Every eye was fixed on the raised marble platform at the center of the square. Amelia Hart stood there alone. Her simple ivory dress moved gently in the breeze. Long chestnut hair rested over her shoulders. Her hands trembled, though she tried desperately to hide it. For as long as she could remember, she had dreamed of this day. The moon goddess chose only one true mate for every Alpha King. Every sign had pointed to her. Every sacred test had confirmed it. Every elder in the kingdom had whispered the same prediction. Amelia Hart would become Luna. Yet something felt wrong. Across the platform, Ethan Blackwood stood motionless in ceremonial black. His broad shoulders carried the weight of the crown, but his silver eyes were colder than winter frost. He had barely looked at her all morning. The distance between them felt greater than the 100 feet of polished stone separating their positions. The royal advisor stepped forward and raised a silver staff. The crowd fell silent. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, the advisor announced, before the witness of the moon goddess and the people of Blackwood Kingdom, do you accept Amelia Hart as your destined mate? The silence stretched. Amelia's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She searched Ethan's face for reassurance, for warmth, for anything. Instead, she found hesitation. A strange shadow crossed his expression. Then his jaw tightened. No, one word. Quiet. Calm. Absolute. The kingdom seemed to stop breathing. Amelia blinked. Surely she had heard wrong. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nobles exchanged stunned looks. Even the elders appeared frozen. Ethan's voice carried across the plaza. I do not accept Amelia Hart as my mate. The words struck harder than any storm. Amelia felt the color drain from her face. Around her, whispers erupted like wildfire. Confusion, shock, curiosity. Some voices already carried amusement. She lowered her eyes before anyone could see the tears gathering there. For a moment, she simply stood still, unable to move, unable to understand. Ethan remained silent. He never looked away, yet neither did he step forward. Neither did he explain. The royal advisor cleared his throat awkwardly and announced the ceremony concluded. Just like that, years of hope vanished in seconds. Amelia turned slowly and descended the marble steps. The crowd parted as she passed. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed relief. Many simply stared. She kept walking, head lowered. Heartbreaking. Behind her, the kingdom buzzed with speculation. Ahead of her waited uncertainty. But as Amelia disappeared beyond the gates of the plaza, something unexpected happened. A sharp pain suddenly tightened inside Ethan's chest. His breath caught. His hands curled into fists. For a brief moment, an invisible bond deep within him seemed to pull toward the woman he had just rejected. The sensation vanished almost instantly, yet it left him shaken. And somewhere beyond the city walls, as Amelia walked away from the life she had lost, destiny quietly began preparing its answer. The kingdom did not forget what happened in the plaza. By sunrise the next morning, every newspaper in Blackwood City carried the same story. Every tavern repeated the same rumor. Every noble household whispered the same question. Why had the Alpha King rejected the woman the moon goddess herself had chosen? Amelia Hart tried not to listen. 3 days after the ceremony, she packed everything she owned into 2 worn travel bags and boarded a northbound stagecoach before dawn. A cold rain followed her departure from the capital. She sat beside the window and watched the distant towers disappear into gray mist. No farewell party. No family procession. No friends waiting at the city gates. The future Luna of the kingdom had become a woman nobody wanted to mention. Yet the deeper pain was not the humiliation. It was the silence. Ethan had never explained. Not one letter arrived. Not one messenger came after her. Not one reason was given. By the time the stagecoach reached the Northern Territories 4 days later, Amelia felt as though she had stepped into another life entirely. The village of Pine Hollow sat nearly 300 miles from the capital, surrounded by evergreen forests and rolling hills. Most people there cared more about harvest seasons than royal ceremonies. Nobody recognized her name. Nobody stared. Nobody laughed. For the first time in months, she could breathe. She rented a small cottage on the edge of town and began helping at the local clinic. Her gift had always been kindness. A calm voice, gentle hands, the ability to comfort frightened children and worried families. The townspeople quickly welcomed her. Day by day, the sharp edges of her heartbreak softened. But far away in Blackwood Palace, peace seemed impossible to find. Ethan Blackwood barely slept. At first, he blamed the stress of ruling. Trade negotiations, border disputes, endless meetings. Yet every night the same dream returned. Amelia standing alone on the marble platform. Amelia turning away. Amelia disappearing into the crowd. He would wake before sunrise with a strange heaviness in his chest. The feeling irritated him. It made no sense. He had followed the warning that had guided him since childhood. The warning hidden inside an ancient prophecy locked beneath the palace archives. According to the text, the Alpha King's true mate would one day bring ruin to the kingdom. For years, Ethan had feared that possibility. When the signs pointed to Amelia, he convinced himself that rejecting her was the only way to protect his people. The kingdom came first. It always had. At least that was what he told himself. Then one evening, nearly 6 weeks after Amelia left the capital, Ethan was reviewing council reports when a sudden pain tightened across his chest. His hand froze above the parchment. The sensation lasted only a second, yet it felt strangely familiar, like an invisible thread being stretched across an impossible distance. His silver eyes narrowed. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, beyond the forests and mountains separating them, Amelia's heart was still connected to him. And despite everything he had done, part of him could not stop searching for her. Some secrets do not stay buried because they are powerful. They stay buried because someone is terrified of the truth. Nearly 2 months after Amelia left the capital, an early winter storm settled over Blackwood Palace. Snow drifted across the castle towers while servants hurried through the halls carrying firewood and lanterns. Ethan Blackwood stood alone in the royal archives beneath the palace. The underground chamber stretched for nearly 100 feet, lined with shelves filled with ancient scrolls, journals, and forgotten records. He had come searching for answers. Sleep had become rare. The strange connection he felt whenever Amelia crossed his thoughts refused to disappear. The prophecy that had guided his decision no longer brought certainty. Instead, it brought questions. Ethan carried a lantern between rows of dusty shelves until he reached the restricted section. Only kings and royal historians were allowed access. There, inside a locked cabinet, rested the document that had changed the course of his life. He unfolded the aging parchment and studied the familiar words once more. The Alpha King's true mate shall bring darkness upon the crown. For years that sentence had echoed through his mind. For years he had believed it without hesitation. Yet something felt wrong. The handwriting shifted slightly near the center of the page. The ink appeared darker than the surrounding text. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had read the prophecy dozens of times, but never this closely. The difference was subtle, almost invisible. His pulse quickened. A sound behind him broke the silence. Royal Advisor Victor Ashcroft stepped from the shadows carrying a stack of documents. His expression remained calm. Too calm. "Your Majesty," Victor said, "I did not expect to find you here." Ethan carefully rolled the prophecy closed. "Neither did I." The advisor smiled politely. "The kingdom remains stable. There is no need to concern yourself with old legends." Ethan studied him. Victor had served the crown for nearly 20 years. He was trusted by every noble family in Blackwood. Yet for the first time, Ethan noticed something unusual. The advisor seemed nervous. Only for a second. Only a flicker. But it was there. After Victor departed, Ethan remained in the archive long after midnight. He searched through records dating back generations. Most revealed nothing. Then, hidden inside a collection of personal correspondence from the late Queen, he discovered a missing reference. A letter. According to the Archive Index, Queen Eleanor Blackwood had written a private document concerning the prophecy shortly before her death. The record showed it had been stored in the royal collection. Yet the letter itself was gone. Ethan stared at the empty space where it should have been. Missing. Not misplaced. Removed. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Someone had taken it. Someone with access to the palace. someone who wanted certain truths hidden. Far away in Pine Hollow, Amelia sat beside the window of her small cottage while snowflakes drifted across the dark sky. A cup of tea rested between her hands. The village slept peacefully around her. For the first time in months, she felt something close to contentment. Yet as she gazed into the falling snow, a strange sadness touched her heart without warning. She could not explain it. She only knew that somewhere beyond the mountains, events were beginning to move, and the lie that had separated two destinies was starting to crack. 3 years passed more quickly than Amelia Hart ever expected. Seasons came and went across the northern hills. Winters covered Pine Hollow in blankets of white. Springs painted the valleys green again. Summers filled the forests with birdsong. Through it all, Amelia built a quiet life far from the kingdom that had once known her name. Most mornings began before sunrise. She would open the windows of her small cottage and breathe in the scent of pine trees and fresh mountain air. The villagers trusted her completely now. They came to her with worries, celebrations, and everyday troubles. She listened to them all with the same patience she had always carried in her heart. The pain she once thought would never fade had become something distant. Not gone, never gone, but quieter, easier to carry. There were still moments when memories returned unexpectedly. A familiar song, a silver banner passing through town, a mention of the royal capital in a traveling merchant's story. Those moments always left a faint ache behind. Yet Amelia no longer cried when they came. She had learned that healing was not forgetting. Healing was learning how to continue living. One snowy afternoon, laughter echoed through the village square as children chased one another through freshly fallen snow. Amelia stood outside the bakery carrying a basket of bread when a small figure darted through the crowd and wrapped both arms around her legs. She smiled immediately. "Slow down, Oliver." The little boy looked up with bright silver eyes that seemed almost impossible beneath his dark hair. "I won the race," he announced proudly. "Again." Amelia laughed softly. "That is very impressive." Oliver grinned. At 3 years old, he possessed endless curiosity and enough energy to challenge the entire village. Everyone adored him. Shopkeepers slipped him cookies. Farmers let him ride in wagons. Elderly neighbors taught him card games beside warm fireplaces. He belonged everywhere he went. Amelia brushed a snowflake from his hair. Looking at him always filled her with the same mixture of joy and wonder. He was the greatest blessing her life had ever known. Yet even now she guarded certain truths carefully. Few people asked questions. In small towns, kindness often mattered more than explanations. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Ethan Blackwood stood at the window of his private study overlooking the capital. The city had changed little over the years. He had. The confident certainty that once guided every decision had slowly disappeared. The missing letter still haunted him. So did the unanswered questions surrounding the prophecy. Investigation after investigation revealed strange inconsistencies within palace records. Documents altered, references removed, timelines rewritten. Someone had spent years shaping a lie. Ethan had not yet discovered who, but he was getting closer. Then, one cold evening, a royal messenger arrived carrying reports from the Northern Territories. Ethan skimmed through trade updates and census records until a single page caught his attention. A list of local volunteers recognized for community service. His eyes stopped on one name, Amelia Hart. For a long moment, he simply stared at the page. She was alive, safe, building a life of her own. Relief washed through him before he could stop it. At that exact moment, far away in Pine Hollow, Oliver looked up at the evening sky and pointed toward the distant horizon. "Mama," he said softly, "why do I keep dreaming about a man with silver eyes?" Amelia's smile slowly faded. Amelia's heart skipped a beat when Oliver asked the question. For a moment she could not speak. The evening wind drifted through the snow-covered streets of Pine Hollow while lanterns glowed warmly in nearby windows. Oliver simply looked up at her with innocent curiosity. He did not understand why the question mattered. He did not know why his silver eyes sometimes made her remember things she had spent years trying to forget. Amelia knelt beside him and brushed a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "What kind of dream?" she asked gently. Oliver smiled. "The same one again. The man is standing on a big hill. He looks sad. Then he turns around like he is searching for somebody." Amelia forced herself to remain calm. "And what happens after that?" "Nothing." Oliver shrugged. "I always wake up. That night, After Oliver fell asleep, Amelia sat alone beside the fireplace. Snow tapped softly against the cottage windows. The flames cast golden light across the room, but the warmth could not quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. 3 years. 3 years since she had left the capital. 3 years since she had walked away from the man who had broken her heart in front of an entire kingdom. Yet somehow his shadow still lingered. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Pine Hollow. Riders from the royal government arrived shortly after sunrise. Villagers gathered along the main road as the horses entered town, carrying blue and silver banners. News spread quickly. The Northern Territories would soon host a major trade summit. Representatives from the capital would inspect roads, villages, and border settlements throughout the region. Amelia listened quietly while helping organize supplies at the clinic. She felt no concern at first. Important officials traveled through northern towns every year. But later that afternoon, the village mayor received a second message. His face turned pale as he read it. "The Alpha King himself is coming," he announced. The room immediately fell silent. Amelia felt the breath leave her lungs. Across the kingdom, Ethan Blackwood prepared for the same journey. Officially, the visit focused on trade and regional development. Unofficially, he had another reason. The report mentioning Amelia's name had never left his desk. For weeks he had found himself reading it repeatedly. Something inside him refused to let it go. The missing letter, the altered prophecy, the strange connection that still existed after all these years. Every unanswered question seemed to point toward the same destination. Pine Hollow. Meanwhile, Oliver spent the afternoon building snow forts with other children near the village square. As the sun began to set, he noticed an unfamiliar traveler standing beside the old fountain. The man wore a long dark coat and carried himself with quiet confidence. There was nothing unusual about him. Yet Oliver could not stop staring. The stranger glanced in his direction for only a second before continuing down the street. A strange feeling settled inside the boy's chest. He had never seen the man before, yet somehow he felt familiar. That evening, miles away from the village, Ethan guided his horse along a frozen mountain road. Snow swirled around him beneath a sky filled with stars. He did not know what awaited him at the end of the journey. He only knew that with every mile he traveled north, the invisible pull he had felt for years grew stronger. The truth arrived on a stormy night. Ethan had just returned to his temporary residence near Pine Hollow when an exhausted royal archivist requested an urgent audience. The elderly scholar carried a weathered wooden case secured with the Blackwood royal seal. Snow clung to his coat as he carefully placed the case on the table. "We found it, Your Majesty," he said quietly. Ethan's pulse quickened. Inside rested a single letter written in elegant handwriting he recognized immediately. Queen Eleanor Blackwood. His mother's final private correspondence. The letter had been hidden behind a false wall inside an abandoned estate once owned by a former royal advisor. Ethan unfolded the pages with unsteady hands. The room seemed to disappear around him as he read. The prophecy had never warned that his true mate would destroy the kingdom. The original text said something entirely different. The true mate would bring change to the crown. Some would fear it, some would resist it, but through her, the kingdom would enter an age of renewal. Ethan stared at the words in disbelief. Change, not destruction. Renewal, not ruin. His hands tightened around the letter. Every decision he had made, every sacrifice, every painful choice, built upon a lie. Then his eyes found another passage written by his mother shortly before her death. "If my son ever reads this, tell him that fear is the easiest weapon to place in a king's heart. The people who seek power will use it. Trust the bond given by destiny. Trust the woman chosen for you." Ethan closed his eyes. A heavy silence settled over the room. For years he had blamed prophecy, blamed duty, blamed responsibility. But none of those excuses could erase what he had done. He had rejected the woman who trusted him most. The woman who had done nothing wrong. The next morning Ethan rode into Pine Hollow without royal ceremony. No banners, no guards, no announcement. He needed air, needed time to think. The village was waking beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Shopkeepers opened their doors. Children hurried through the streets bundled in scarves and coats. Then Ethan saw him. A little boy stood beside the fountain feeding crumbs to a group of birds. Dark hair, small frame, bright silver eyes. Ethan's horse slowed automatically. The child looked up. Their gazes met. Time seemed to stop. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. The boy's eyes were identical to his own. Not similar. Identical. The same silver shade that had belonged to generations of Blackwood kings. The child smiled politely. "Hello, mister." Ethan could barely speak. "Hello." The boy tilted his head curiously. "Are you visiting the village?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes. My name is Oliver." The words struck harder than any revelation hidden in ancient archives. Ethan looked at the child, and suddenly countless details fell into place. The timing. Amelia's disappearance. The strange connection he had felt for years. The dreams. The pull that refused to fade. A terrible realization settled inside his heart. Oliver was not simply a child from Pine Hollow. Oliver was his son. And for 3 years, Ethan Blackwood had lived without knowing his own family existed. For several minutes after Oliver ran off to join his friends, Ethan remained standing beside the fountain, unable to move. Snow drifted through the air around him, settling on his coat and shoulders, but he barely noticed. His son. The words echoed through his mind again and again. His son. 3 years of missed birthdays. 3 years of missed laughter. 3 years of moments he could never recover. For the first time since becoming king, Ethan felt completely powerless. Later that afternoon, he found himself standing before a familiar cottage at the edge of Pine Hollow. Smoke curled from the chimney. A small wooden swing moved gently in the winter breeze. Through the front window, he could see warm light glowing inside. Amelia was there, so close that only a few feet separated them. Yet the distance felt greater than the 300 miles she had once traveled to escape him. Ethan raised his hand and knocked. The sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet afternoon. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. Amelia froze instantly. Neither of them spoke. For a moment, the years disappeared. Ethan saw the same chestnut hair, the same gentle eyes, the same quiet strength that had always set her apart from everyone else. Amelia stared at him as though she could not quite believe he was real. Her expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, and finally, to something far more guarded. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. Ethan had rehearsed countless explanations during the journey north. None of them seemed adequate now. "I came to tell you the truth," he said. Amelia gave a small, humorless laugh. 3 years late. The words landed harder than any accusation. Ethan lowered his gaze. "You are right." Silence settled between them. Inside the cottage, a clock ticked quietly. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed while playing in the snow. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet everything had changed. "I know about the prophecy," Ethan finally said. Amelia's expression tightened. "The prophecy that mattered more than I did." He flinched. The prophecy was altered. Her eyes widened slightly. "What? Someone changed it years ago? My mother left a letter explaining everything. I only found it recently." Amelia stared at him. For the first time, uncertainty appeared beneath her calm exterior. Ethan reached into his coat and carefully removed the folded letter. "I should have trusted you. I should have trusted us. Instead, I trusted fear." Amelia looked at the letter but made no move to take it. "And now?" she asked. Ethan swallowed. The next words were the hardest he had ever spoken. "Now I know I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Emotion flickered across her face before she quickly hid it. Then another voice interrupted from inside the house. "Mama." Oliver appeared in the doorway carrying a small wooden toy. His silver eyes immediately found Ethan. The boy smiled. "Oh, it is you again." Ethan's heart tightened. Amelia glanced between them and suddenly understood. She saw the shock in Ethan's eyes. She saw the realization he could no longer hide. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The truth was already standing between them. The following morning arrived beneath clear skies and fresh snow. Amelia barely slept. Long after Oliver had fallen asleep, she sat beside the fireplace staring at the letter Ethan had left behind. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Part of her wanted to believe it. Part of her wanted to throw it into the fire and forget he had ever returned. 3 years of heartbreak could not be erased by a single apology. Yet the truth had changed everything. The prophecy had been altered. The choice that shattered her life had been built upon deception. Outside, Pine Hollow slowly awakened to another peaceful day. Inside the cottage, uncertainty lingered in every corner. Over the next several days, Ethan remained in the village. To the surprise of nearly everyone, he behaved nothing like a king. He attended community meetings, helped repair damaged fences after a winter storm, listened to farmers discuss road conditions and crop shipments. The villagers gradually relaxed around him. Some even began to like him. Amelia watched from a distance. She noticed the way he greeted people by name, the way he always paused when children spoke to him. Most of all, she noticed the way his eyes followed Oliver. Not possessively, not arrogantly, simply with quiet wonder. One afternoon, Oliver invited Ethan to help build a snow fort near the village square. Amelia expected the king to politely decline. Instead, he spent nearly 2 hours stacking snow blocks beside a group of laughing children. When Oliver proudly placed the final piece on top, Ethan smiled in a way Amelia had never seen before. There was no crown in that expression, no authority, only happiness. Something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the certainty of her anger began to soften around the edges. Then unexpected news arrived from the capital. Royal investigators had finally completed their search. Victor Ashcroft had confessed to altering records connected to the prophecy years earlier. His ambition had driven every deception. He believed controlling the king's fears would increase his own influence within the kingdom. The revelation spread rapidly through Blackwood territory. Public outrage followed. For Ethan, however, the news brought little satisfaction. Knowing who caused the lie did not undo the years that had been lost. That evening, he stood outside Amelia's cottage as sunset painted the snow-covered hills gold and amber. "I cannot change the past," he said quietly. "I know that." Amelia remained silent. Ethan looked toward the distant mountains. "But if there is even the smallest chance to earn your trust again, I will spend the rest of my life trying." The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Before Amelia could respond, the front door burst open. Oliver raced outside carrying a drawing. "Look what I made." He held up the paper proudly. 3 figures stood beneath a bright moon. A woman, a little boy, a man with silver eyes. Amelia felt her throat tighten. Ethan stared at the drawing without speaking. Oliver grinned. "It is my family." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Amelia looked down at her son. The innocence in his smile carried none of the pain that had defined the past 3 years. Only hope. And for the first time since Ethan returned, she allowed herself to wonder whether hope might still exist for all of them. Spring arrived in Blackwood Kingdom with clear skies and fields of wildflowers stretching across the countryside. Months had passed since Ethan's return to Pine Hollow. The kingdom had changed. So had the people within it. Trust had not returned overnight. Forgiveness never worked that way. It grew slowly, like the first green shoots after a long winter. Amelia remained in Pine Hollow with Oliver, while Ethan traveled constantly between the village and the capital. He never pressured her, never demanded answers, never asked for promises. Instead, he showed up, again and again, for Oliver's birthday, for village festivals. 4 quiet afternoons spent teaching a curious little boy how to ride a pony across open fields. One evening, a royal messenger arrived carrying an official invitation. The kingdom would hold a public gathering in the capital. Every major family, every regional leader, and thousands of citizens would attend. Amelia immediately understood what it meant. The same plaza, the same place where everything had fallen apart. Days later, she stood once again before the towering marble platform in Royal Moon Plaza. The crowd was larger than she remembered. Silver banners moved gently in the warm breeze. Thousands of faces filled the terraces. Yet this time she did not stand alone. Oliver held one of her hands. Ethan stood nearby. The plaza gradually fell silent. Ethan stepped forward and faced the kingdom. No crown rested upon his head. No royal cape covered his shoulders. For the first time in years, he stood not as a ruler, but simply as a man prepared to tell the truth. His voice carried across the square. 3 years ago, I stood in this place and made the greatest mistake of my life. Silence deepened. No one moved. No one interrupted. I allowed fear to guide my choices. I believed a lie. And because of that lie, I hurt someone who deserved my trust. Ethan turned toward Amelia. Emotion flickered across countless faces in the crowd. Amelia Hart was always my true mate. A ripple spread through the plaza. Ethan continued. She was never the danger. She was never the threat. She was the future I was too afraid to accept. Amelia felt her heart tighten. Not from pain this time. From something gentler. Something healing. Ethan slowly lowered himself onto one knee before the entire kingdom. Gasps echoed across the terraces. Kings did not kneel. Yet he did, without hesitation, without pride. "I cannot change what I did," he said quietly, "but I will spend the rest of my life proving that you deserved better." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. Nearby, Oliver squeezed her hand tighter. Ethan stood and extended his hand toward her. Not as a command, not as an expectation, simply an invitation. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. The plaza erupted into applause. Cheers echoed across the city. Sunlight spilled across the marble stones while thousands witnessed the moment destiny finally completed its journey. Ethan smiled before turning toward the crowd once more. He gently rested a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "And this," he said proudly, "is my son." The kingdom erupted again. Oliver's silver eyes widened before a grin spread across his face. As the celebration continued around them, Amelia looked toward the horizon where golden light stretched across the city. Years earlier, she had walked away from this place with a broken heart. Now she stood beside the family she never thought she would have. Above them, the spring sky shone bright and clear. And for the first time in a very long time, all three of them felt exactly where they belonged.